Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelly, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world?
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
Where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. So I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, and service, and food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. Okay.
On behalf of Cliff Kelly, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank for coming where it matters to help homeless veterans have a hot meal today and a care package. We are sincerely grateful for this partnership. Yes.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally. Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
is Cliff Kelly, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world.
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us. Oh.
And we've
We are a roundtable talk show where information, resources, and referrals are provided intentionally every Saturday to empower our military population on WVON 1690 AM, the iHeart Radio app from 4 to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Please visit our website at www.americashg.org.
What's going on? What's going on?
From the Xfinity Studios at WVON, it's America's Heroes Group, hosted by Cliff Kelly, with co-host Dr. Damon Arnold and National Guard veteran Sean Claiborne on the Talk of Chicago, 1690 WVON.
Good afternoon. Welcome to America's Heroes Group on WVON 1690 AM, the Talk of Chicago. I am Vietnam veteran host Cliff Kelly. America's Heroes Group is a live streaming podcast, global platform, radio, print, and digital media broadcast show that empowers change agents through intentionally disseminating information, resources, and referrals to empower our military population.
And with that, welcome to America's Heroes Group, our roundtable with Steve Seidman, Legally Speaking with Steve. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 24, 2022. You just heard our host, Cliff Kelly. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a guest on the line, our partner, founding attorney, Seidman Law Firm office with over 30 years as an experienced trial lawyer focused on personal injury. Steve is an America's Heroes Group partner, sponsor, and advisory board member. Steve, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Pretty good. So what news do you have to tell us about what is going on in the legal realm, especially when we have a lot of stuff going on, especially with these burn pits and what's going on in Camp Lejeune? What information do we have today?
Well, it's more good news about the benefits that are available to those veterans who have been exposed to water contamination and other contamination at Camp Lejeune. They're, as you know, deluged with advertisements from lawyers out there who are advertising their services because Congress has now opened up this act that says that if there are certain cancers that fit within the categories certain cancers you have, you could apply and sue the government, even though it might have gone back all the way to 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. The bottom line is they contaminated the water at Lejeune. There's also, we've talked about this before in the show, a Camp Ord out in California that's coming to the attention where it's shown that all kinds of chemicals have leached and into the drinking water of the troops out there. And we're seeing more and more of these toxic torts that are kind of coming to fruition. You know, people probably heard about the large verdict against Sterigenics. Sterigenics is the place that used to sterilize medical equipment out in Willowbrook, and they emitted a certain chemical in the air that really gave cancer to residents of Willowbrook at the amount of 7 times the amount of cancers that other people had. That's similar to what we see here going on with Camp Lejeune. And we've talked about this before too, Sean. The burn pits been used for years and years and years There's now legislation, at least you could get VA benefits. You can't sue the government for that. But in burn pits, as we've talked about many times, all kinds of things were burned in there, from munitions, feces, gasoline, and just horrific chemicals. And the cancer producing qualities of these chemicals were such that fortunately Congress has passed now laws about that and being able to recover veterans benefits. And what I've seen over the last years, and Glenda Smith has been the wonderful your executive producer, we've seen all kinds of changes in the last 5 or 7 years since I've been doing this with you guys, and it's coming to an end with me, but I always want to be a partner with you guys. But the bottom line is that we have seen, for instance, sexual discrimination, sexual attacks at bases stepped up, and legislation for that. We've seen where the federal government can now be sued when an Army member is malpracticed upon while in active duty at a hospital with a government doctor. Believe it or not, these were things that we didn't see when we first started.
Wow.
We've seen earplug cases where earplugs were sold that were defective, and 3M is getting sued for those. We've seen Camp Lejeune and toxic torts legislation allowed. We've seen all kinds of things change, and later in the broadcast I'd like to talk about what we've talked about before, which is the discrimination in the VA system on VA benefits for those of color, and the lawsuit that's existing to try to stop that. I'd like to start, though, maybe by talking about because it is National Suicide Prevention Month. One time during the last period of years, I had a person as a guest when we did the show, and he talked about how he was very active in trying to prevent suicides that were at that time 20 suicides a day in 2018-19. The good news is the number of veteran suicides in America fell to less than 17 a day in 2020.
Wow.
Which is fallen. It's a very positive sign that efforts to provide additional mental health care and all these support services to veterans may be saving lives. That's a real big change, because it used to be 22 a day. 17 a day is a big drop. Now, the annual suicide prevention report, which was released just a couple weeks ago, believe it or not, it goes back 2 years. It goes back a year, 2020, actually. But it showed that 6,146 veterans died by suicide in 2020, which was the last year that data was available. That was a decrease by about 9.7%, which was 600 fewer cases since 18. However, it's nearly double the drop that was seen in the suicide rate among the general population. So that's, the VA Secretary Dennis McDonough expressed some optimism over these findings, because he said it showed real progress. But he also said, and it's true, there's so much more work to be done.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, because you have to think about it, from the 20-year war of Afghanistan and Iraq, 6,000 is about, we have 6,000 suicides per year. That's about how many died in the entire conflict of Afghanistan and Iraq.
And what McDonough said is that one veteran suicide is one too many, and they're going to continue with all kinds of funding. So I have to turn this back. If you think about it, 16.8 veterans a day died by suicide in 20, which was, by the way, the first time this calculation fell below 17 since 2006. What I have to throw out there is this is positive news, but veterans, as you just pointed out, remain more likely to die by suicide than Americans who never served in the military. And then in the conflict themselves, more people died here at home, which is just ridiculous. The suicide rate among veterans is roughly 31.7 deaths per 100,000 veterans, almost double that of non-veterans. So I guess I have to throw out why. Why is the answer that suicide is the leading cause of death among veterans 45 years of age and younger, only behind accidents? It's hard to fathom, but I think if I could throw it out there, maybe the fact that the veterans get home and the prospects of what they fought for, maybe they're not seeing they're upset, they're depressed, but it is such a high rate. And since it's National Suicide Month, as what was stated at the beginning of the year, I guess we have to try to continue to work on talking, and any veteran out there that's listening, to try to get as much counseling as available at the VA system, because improvement takes a lot to do. I mean, you have to address these suicide prevention. You have to really work hard. And I know the VA has taken a real big step in this, in collaboration with all kinds of agency, to make sure that things get better. I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious as to why. I never really understood why the rate was so high, but it has to do with helplessness when people get home. But there is help, and people should seek it out, because the VA is very interested in wanting to help with community-based suicide prevention.
It's good you brought that up, Steve, because there's a lot of things we're going to talk about around that, exactly around that issue, which is why are veterans coming home and committing suicide? What are the resources and the tools available to veterans? And a lot of the feelings that veterans have are very common. Coming home from service, particularly if you've been deployed, getting out of that routine that you've had every day, that structure that you had every day where you were told what to do 24/7, you knew exactly what your purpose was all the time, and then coming to a civilian world where all of a sudden that's just pulled out right from under you. And coming sometimes home to families who've changed. You've been gone for some years maybe on multiple deployments, seeing a lot of traumatic things that most people will never experience in their life. God willing, they never have to experience in their life. Having experienced these types of experiences, coming home to people that can't relate to that, and you feel isolated, and you don't have anybody to talk to. You think you have no one to talk to, but there are people you can talk to, and that's the thing that most veterans need to understand, that you're not alone in this, and you can get help, and there are resources, tools available, and there's people who've gone through the same experience that you've gone through. So we're going to expose a lot of that information and a lot of those resources today on this show. So I'm glad you brought that up. And once again, to put things in perspective, a quarter of the suicides in this country are from veterans, yet we make up less than 7% of the population. That's a red flag all in itself within the numbers. Think about that. More than a quarter of the population, of the quarter of the people that commit suicide are going to be veterans, but less than 10% of the population are veterans, and that number is shrinking.
It's shrinking, but it's still staggering if you consider that 17 a day in 2020, and we don't know where it is in 21 because the data is not available. But that is a tremendous amount of people. I mean, so it's the month that we have to start thinking about it and focusing as to the help that's available, the money that's being spent by the VA. You have the VA secretary who's doing his best, his level best to try to help people. I think a lot of it is just something that I would not understand because I never served. But people who served, as you stated, all of these reasons, these various reasons, where they come home and everything is completely different. You feel like it's helpless, but nothing is helpless. You've got to seek the care and treatment that you need.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, Steve, and that is, we have this question a lot from a lot of veterans that, and people that are even civilians have these same questions, because a lot of these resources are not just for veterans, but also for veterans' families. So, for example, the Camp Lejeune, from what I understand, families also have recourse and have things that they can sue for the experiences that they've had, even if the person who was there, the veteran that was there, has passed on. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And actually, there was one baby that died back in the day, and that was really the first lawsuit that started off the Camp Lejeune series of lawsuits, and that baby died of cancer. And the mother was dogged in her determination to find out, because she was there with her husband who was serving there at Camp Lejeune, why this happened. And it turned out that she exposed the fact that the type of cancer this child died from was related to the type of water contamination with massive amounts of chemicals that were put in. So that daughter, for instance, could sue. A wife could sue for injuries, because not only, as we know, not only were the military bases used for the soldiers and those enlisted, they were also, the family members were exposed to the same type of environmental concerns that the troops were. So yes, if you were at Camp Lejeune and you were sick yourself and got cancer, you have the right yourself to sue, even though you might not be serving in the military. So yes, that definitely is a great point, Sean.
And then once again, give us your information, because a lot of people want to reach out to you. I know there's a lot of listeners out there that are curious about what legal remedies they have. Because once again, we have veteran service organizations that are there to help you with filing claims with the VA, getting on disability from the VA, or just getting VA benefits. But attorneys who are qualified and have experience dealing with government issues, VA issues, and things like that, you can take them a step further and get remedies for other problems that is not addressed in this regular filling out paperwork, getting a claim filled from the VA. Is that correct?
Absolutely. For instance, I'll give you an example. Those people that now go into the hospital, if they're veterans, VA hospital, and they get malpracticed on by a doctor, right? Or, now with the new rules, you could go elsewhere. You don't have to stick with the VA doctors. And if you get malpracticed upon outside and you while using your veterans benefits, you have a right to sue either that doctor, if it's a personal doctor or a private doctor, but you also have a right under the Federal Tort Claims Act, just like the Lejeune cases, to file a malpractice case against the VA. And we see this a lot, and that includes those family members who are at the VA facilities who are having the unfortunate situation of being malpracticed upon. It happens. It's a fact of life, and you have rights to pursue that. I've been doing this for 40 years now, going on 41, and I work with fine lawyers in my office. My office number is 312-781-1977. I'll tell you, there's a lot of sad stories, but unless you step up and protect your rights, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to protect yourself. And I will tell you that that the laws are set out to help you, and especially with this Camp Lejeune, that it could be 30, 40 years old, and it doesn't even need to fall under the categories of the cancer. If you could prove that the cancer is something that's caused by the type of chemical exposure, that is also something that you're entitled to get. The good news here this month is that veterans could see their benefits boosted by the biggest margin in 40 years, because this last Thursday, Congress finalized plans to guarantee that veterans check have a cost of living boost, and it's going to go up to 8.7%. So this is a very big thing for those that are listening, that the checks, the federal officials are expected to announce that it's going to be a big increase. Obviously, for a veteran, for instance, receiving about $1,500 in monthly payouts, that level increases $130 each month. So that's obviously a big deal for those that are listening. And I want to make sure that your listeners know about that, because they're going to have to, like everything else, kind of look into it with everything. You have to sort of look into it and sort of find out what's what on that. If I could take a couple minutes just to talk a little bit about sexual reproductive rates for women at the VA. I did a little bit of research on it this week, because with all this stuff going on and about reproductive rights, and we all know about the new cases that have come down, or case that came down. We all know what Indiana tried to do, by the way. They tried to make abortion illegal, and the governor, I think, somebody vetoed it, thankfully, or the courts did, they were going far. But women's veterans are finally getting access to life-saving reproductive health care. And today, more than 2 million living women veterans who fought for and defended our country are now able to get some reproductive rights. You would think, well, what are you talking about? Well, it wasn't, believe it or not, until 1992 that the Veterans Administration authorized to provide reproductive health care services to women's veterans. So no women's veterans before 1992 had any reproductive health care services. They couldn't talk about maybe doing what they needed to do for themselves. But believe it or not, the original authority excluded pregnancy care, infertility services, and abortion. In 1996, the Veterans Health Care, there was a Reform Act that authorized the VA Secretary to determine what kind of care is needed, and they now were able, since 1996, to provide certain infertility services. So believe it or not, you couldn't go, if you were a woman, into the VA and get infertility services at the VA. And finally, in 1999, they issued some regulations, but now, on September 2nd, obviously just 3 weeks ago, the VA took action to correct the injustice about Dobbs and avert imminent future harm to veterans. They published an interim final rule that updates its medical benefit package. It removes the longstanding prohibition on providers' ability to discuss abortion with patients and authorize the VA medical facilities to provide abortions in cases of rape, incest, life, or health of a veteran. This is a strong first step, everybody who's a woman out there, that finally puts the VA on par with other federal health care programs. But guess what? It's already under threat. The House Committee on Veterans Affairs in the last week has recently held hearings on women's veterans health care. Republican members of the committee found it to be appalling, made remarks, and I think that it's very important for you to call your congressmen, women, and senators and tell them that you, as a woman, want equitable reproductive rights. This is what you need to be stand up and counted, just like you need to be stand up and counted if you're going to sue for Lejeune or file claims for burn pits. So I think I'm sort of out of time. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Steve Seidman, founding attorney of Seidman Law Office with 30 years experience as a trial lawyer focused on personal injury. He's also America's Heroes Group partner, sponsor, and advisory board member. And on the note of what you just mentioned, Steve, once upon a time, I believe, and we'll check with Stephanie Kalota later on, but it was actually you could be discharged as a woman for getting pregnant, if I'm not mistaken. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back. Group, this time with a roundtable community outreach with NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelly. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a panelist today. He's got a unique individual and someone that you're going to have a story that you will remember for a time to come. He's a U.S. Marine Corps Purple Heart. Can't expect anything less from the U.S. Marines. Recipient, combat veteran, and the program director for the Buncombe County Veterans Treatment Court in Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to talk about the North Carolina Buncombe County Veteran Treatment Court and his personal experience. We're going to particularly pay some attention to the human connection and also the things he's been working on in his life and his career. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. So tell us your story. So you have had some experiences. You've been hit, but some might say rock bottom, been to those places. Tell us about that and how you got your life turned around to get to where you are today.
Yeah, my story is definitely not unique. I went into the Marine Corps right out of high school. My father served, my grandfather served, and I was really, really proud to go to Parris Island. I was an infantry member, ended up going to 3-7 Lima Company in 29 Palms. We go to the Syrian border. This is 2003, and we ended up losing 26 Marines out there to improvised explosive device. And I was hit by an IED April 7th of 2004, and the shrapnel went through my body, through my legs, through my arms, shrapnel in my left eye. And, yeah, I knew I was going to die. I knew right then and there that I was dying. I could hear my other Marines screaming, PFC Vega, and my best friend, Chris Wasser, half of his head was missing. So here I am dying, and I remember the corpsman came running up to me and shot me up with morphine. He shot me up twice. And in that moment, when I had such a feeling of terror out of nowhere, just this sense of serenity came over me. And I had no idea that would be the beginning of this long struggle with opioids, with addiction. But here in my worst moment, dying on the Syrian border, a sense of peace came over. So like many veterans, I get airlifted, go to Germany, then sent to Walter Reed, have 32 surgeries, and a doctor tells me, Kevin, you're never going to walk again. Bad, we're probably going to have to amputate both legs. But throughout that year and a half, I still had opioids. And it was just this calming of the trauma experience and the separation from my tribe and my community. And I'm stateside while they're still over there. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, I really, really struggled. I didn't have a sense of purpose anymore. Didn't have a sense of identity. And, this is really what I see every day working with the veteran community here is the Marine Corps gave us so much. And it was this calling that was greater than myself. And then my transition out of it, mine was unique because I was airlifted out. But even veterans that just EAS out, they may have a PowerPoint presentation about what's it like in the real world, and good luck. I didn't even get the PowerPoint presentation, but I found myself struggling. I lost everything and everyone I loved because of my addiction. It didn't matter how much I loved my friends and family, how much I wanted to keep a stable job, do all these things that meant the world to me. My addiction was stronger. And I wish I could tell you it was just a linear journey to recovery, but we know that's not the case. I had a lot of ups and downs. I found myself in the hospital. I was involuntarily committed. I arrested, so I was justice involved, all of these different things. And I also tried recovery. But what I arrived at was that I couldn't live without drugs, and I couldn't live with them. And so really everything was just a slow suicide. I didn't have the courage to just kill myself, but I did not know how to live. But I reached a place where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I threw my hands up, and that was, maybe my 10th bottom, 10th time going inpatient. And one day at a time, here I am 11 years later, and I have a renewed sense of hope and a renewed sense of purpose. And a big part of that is giving back to the veterans that are struggling like I was when I first got out, and those veterans that are finding themselves in the legal system and may believe they have no hope and may wish to die. So I can't say it's just one thing that was the cure-all. Mm-hmm. I did get on medication for opioid use disorder that really helped me out, Suboxone specifically. That medication kind of quelled the every cell in my body screaming that I need heroin and fentanyl. But that was just the foundation. Then I got to begin the real work, which is, the psychological healing. Mm. And here I am now working with the Veterans Treatment Court in Buncombe County.
Wow. So when you go through that pain, I've heard somebody tell me one time that the pain of when people go to drug court or treatment court or any kind of abuse court, it's the pain that they're going through is not a pain of necessarily, it's not just a pain of addiction, but it's a psychological pain. There's a hurt, an emotional pain that's really at the core of everything. And until that pain is actually treated, you can treat the drugs, you can treat, the physical pain all you want, but until you treat that inner hurt in your soul, you're not really making much progress. Is that right?
Yeah, that's so true. And I've been with the Veterans Treatment Court since 2016, and that is exactly what I'm seeing. Really, addiction is a symptom, but the suffering, the underlying suffering, is what we're trying to work at. And that a lot of times is, that's the trauma experience. But if we talk about trauma and what is trauma, there's this author, Bessel van der Kolk, and he describes trauma in an interesting way. He says trauma is our inability to self-regulate the body, because we're these amazing machines designed to keep ourselves alive. He says trauma is our inability to self-regulate and our inability to generate meaningful relationships. And when you say, addiction is one part of it, but I'm seeing how do we make healthy attachments with other human beings? Mm-hmm. How can I have a healthy relationship with myself? So, there's interesting science behind this. There's interesting, the neuroscience is proving what I think you and I also feel just within our soul and our heart is we need to connect with other humans on a full level, a meaningful level, and have a meaningful sense of purpose. And there's a quote by Sebastian Junger, and he says, well, our military members, they're willing to go off and fight the war, but while they're willing to die for this country, they return home to find they're not sure how to live for it. Mm. And that really kind of resonates with what we're doing. We're not just treating addiction, okay, don't use heroin anymore, don't use cocaine, but how can we empower these veterans to have healthy, meaningful lives?
Wow. The one thing I noticed about doing the research on treatment courts is that the success rate is way higher through treatment court. The recidivism is very low compared to the regular civilian justice system. So giving someone a choice or giving someone the option to say, hey, we're going to put you in a treatment program that's not just, seeing a counselor or whatever, but going through the hard task of really getting down to the bottom of getting you off of these drugs, getting to the core root problem, the original hurt that was inside of you. If you take that path, in New Hampshire, there was a judge that talked about some statistics, and she said that in her district, it would cost about $30,000 to put somebody through the regular criminal court system. It cost $8,000 to put someone through treatment court. The success rate of the justice system is something like 30%. And you're spending $30,000 to get 30%. 78% success rate in treatment court.
Right.
And this is New Hampshire. These are real numbers, real facts. So tell me, from your experience, what are some of the breakthroughs that you're discovering through treatment court that it's not being addressed in the civilian justice system?
Yeah, that's a good question. The teams on these diversion courts, be it Veterans Treatment Court, Adult Drug Treatment Court, Mental Health, Sobriety Court, DUI Court, they're made up by prosecutors, public defenders, community mental health teams, the judge, our team here in Asheville. We've got, about 12 people on the team, and they all have unique skills. And I was talking to our prosecutor, and he said, this is my favorite thing about coming to work is doing the Veterans Treatment Court and doing adult drug treatment court, because I get to know the clients as human beings. And the design of our present legal system doesn't allow that. It removes the humanity, the dignity, and just makes it very, very, this is the charge. It is cut and dry. And so anytime that we can put the human back in, and then you highlighted it, we know simple incarceration doesn't work. After 9 years, I think the Department of Justice showed 9 years after exiting the prison system, 83% of people are going to return. And that's just, clearly it's not working. This is not sustainable. And part of it, we know that our justice system is the oldest form of white supremacy and maintaining white supremacy. These are antiquated systems, and we are looking at the outcomes that we're getting, and no one is surprised. This is a system that was designed to perpetuate inequality and maintain the status quo. And so we are really honored to say, hey, all right, we want to try something different. We want to try something different that focuses on treatment and accountability, because treatment alone is really amazing depending on the risks and the needs of the population. But the accountability element, especially for our veteran population, that's when they thrive, because veterans are used to that structure. They're used to having the team dynamic, even the hierarchy of all these things. So, I think ultimately we're seeing the consequences of the system working as it was designed to work.
Now, you're a licensed clinical social worker. So when you meet with people, being a veteran and also having been there, done that with abuse and things along those lines, having gone through that same pain, how do people relate to you versus someone who has not experienced that? And do you think that's a prerequisite in these cases to help people really get to that level?
Well, I have noticed that being a veteran is in itself an intervention. We talk about this in de-escalation and crisis training, that if law enforcement has a officer who served, and maybe you're interacting with a veteran, just veterans talking to veterans can de-escalate and really, connect and build rapport instantly. When I see a Marine that walks in my room I've never met, and I say Semper Fi, Devil Dog, instantly their guard is, dropped a little bit, and we can connect on a meaningful level. Now, as a licensed clinical social worker, I believe all humans can connect with others regardless of our different lived experience. I'll say, personally, I actually like the therapists that were not veterans. And the reason why is because they wanted to know what was the experience. They have no idea what it means to be in war. And so now that I am a licensed therapist, I have to remember this beginner's mindset where I cannot impose my experience on every vet I meet. And I almost have to make this daily recommitment. My story is not their story. Tell me more. What does that mean to you? What does that feel like? What does that look like? How does it show up in your life? Because it'd be too easy for me, for a Marine to walk in. I say, hey, Devil Dog, good to see you. Oh, don't even tell me anymore. I already know your story. And, we know each other. So, in some ways, to answer your question, I think it doesn't make a difference. There are strengths, there are pros and cons. For me, and I started this job, I think I was not yet a licensed social worker. I hadn't gone to graduate school, and it was just doing it because I saw, working with veterans, we had this bond, and it was a really, really cool thing. I started as a mentor, And I don't know if anyone's discussed kind of the mentor dynamic in veterans courts with you.
A little bit, but go through that because that's really important, I think. And I think that's one of the key differences between your success or failure. It reminds me of like an AA type experience when you have like a support group around you that help you get through. And another key thing to talk about this is not done in prison. Because one of the arguments, because we have a culture that likes to punish. We're in the punishment culture. We want justice and punishment versus treatment and solutions. But the thing of it is that it's not done in a prison system. So letting people go back home and cope in real world situations versus being in a closed and a controlled environment. So talk about that.
Yeah, and we as a nation, we love that. We love to proclaim, hey, we are about justice. Mm-hmm. It's called the justice. It's more appropriate to call it the legal system. Justice can sometimes be evasive and elusive. But what we have found, and evidence supports this, for this population who have dual diagnosis, they have trauma, they have addiction, then the environment that they're in, everything is interconnected. We are not operating as human beings as silos. So to learn these skills in a structured environment is very important. And that is well and good. But if you cannot put them into action to practice them in society, nothing really changes. And so we want to empower our veterans, and a mentor is part of that, same as you were saying as a sponsor. The mentor walks alongside this veteran as a battle buddy, and they're not their pastor, they're not their banker, they're not their counselor, problem solver. They're almost a mirror, and the mentor is always bouncing back. Tell me, what would you do in this situation? And I started as a mentor, and I just had assigned one veteran, and I went through the NADCP boot camp, the Justice for Vets boot camp. It was in D.C., a week long. And I remember the training, and it's just simple things, active listening. I would have this veteran call me. It would be a Friday, and then our veterans are on curfew in the beginning of the program. And he'd call and he'd say, hey, Kevin, I want to go on this date tonight. I want to go to the movies. I was thinking about going to this movie at 11 o'clock tonight. What do you think? And obviously I have an opinion, but I would bounce it back to the veteran. I'd say, well, man, that's great to hear you're making these healthy connections. Well, I know you got to talk to the judge on Friday. You got veterans court. What do you think the judge will say? And I'd just mirror back, right? Because these are these veterans' decisions, and ultimately their decisions are what led them to the legal system. And then he'd be like, oh, you got me, Kevin. You're right. All right, we don't want to do this. Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble with the judge. But these were the real-world situations, and they get to live them out, to practice new people, new places, and new things. That is what we have to change. And the judge, when any veteran enters the court, he says, this is an easy program. The only thing that I need from you as a veteran is you have to show up, you have to be honest, and you have to try. And if you can do those three things, not only are you going to be able to make it through this, but you're going to transform your life. And that transformation can't happen behind prison walls like it does when we're in the community. So we get to see veterans who entered our court, no contact with maybe their kids and their wife or their family members. They don't have a stable job. They have no housing. All of these pressures are on them, unaddressed mental health and trauma. They graduate 18 months later for our program. We just had a graduate, and this is who I'm thinking of when I'm sharing this. He now has transportation. He now is reunited with his 4-year-old son. He has service-connected disability, which he had never thought to pursue in his entire life. He now has VA health care, a substance use team at the VA. He reunited with his mother, and he's in a poetry class, and he now does this journaling, and he did equine therapy. But you talk to him, and who he is now, he has a sense of purpose and something bigger than himself, which for him is being a father. But he could never have achieved that if we were just behind in a prison wall saying, this is what it means to be a dad. to show up as a father.
Wow. So what happens when somebody falls off the wagon? Is there a second chance, or how does that part of it work? Because I know that's going to be a struggle. When we're dealing with people with addiction, they're going to fall off the wagon at some point. How does that process unfold?
Yeah, and this is built into the design of diversion courts. Same as my story. I went in 10 times before it finally took hold. And there is not a single number, like 5 times is how many times we give them before they're removed from the program. For every unwanted behavior, we will have a response. And for every positive behavior, we will celebrate that. At its core, it's this conditioning. And we are helping the veterans to condition themselves to new behavior. So when they have a return to use and they struggle, we don't shame them. We don't belittle them. It's not a moral shortcoming. Instead, what we do is try to support them with more treatment. And we work with the clinical staff to identify, all right, if this veteran is receiving A, B, and C treatment and they're still struggling, clearly they need a higher level of care. And there's standardized assessments that they use in the ASAM and all that. But we are never going to terminate anyone from our court if they are showing up, being honest, and trying.
Wow.
And you can do all 3 of those and return to use. But we have seen veterans that just continue and are unable to change, and could be unable to change in their environment. And they were in our program maybe a year and a half and just were not making the change that we need to see. And so they were terminated from our court. But even if a veteran is terminated from the court, and I love sharing this with stakeholders, even if they're terminated, we are still seeing that as a success because they're connected to health care. They have a new support system. They have perhaps service connection. They have a recovery community because they have to be engaged in some type of community-based recovery and treatment. So they have all of that. And then we will take them back into the Veterans Court. All we need is 12 months to elapse. So if they have a new charge, we'll take this veteran back into our program and try again. And we have a veteran who is on track to graduate right now, who 3 years ago he came in our court, it just wasn't clicking. But so he's terminated. Here he is back in our program, and he's about to graduate. And when I asked him, what was the secret? He said, I just wasn't ready to change.
Wow.
And no Veterans Court or anything could do that for me. So even if they're unsuccessful, we see there are benefits, and then we'll take them back a year later if it's appropriate.
Wow. So if someone does fall off the wagon or gets kicked out of the program, do they have to then serve their original sentence? Is there some kind of court punishment for that, or?
Yeah. So, and every veteran's order, what the judge sentences them to, is unique. In North Carolina, we have new statutes that limit like a veteran will never enter into a court and then have to go serve their original punishment.
Okay.
There are caps. The judge will also take into account their length of time in the court. So some veterans, after this whole experience, may just go and serve 30 days, or they may do 60. There's a lot of factors that I probably shouldn't even speak on because I'm not an attorney. Mm-hmm. But from a social work perspective, I've advocated I never want to punish someone for the disease of addiction. And if that's the reason they were terminated, then we should do everything we can to make sure we're not just compounding time, adding 2 years plus do your original sentence. That makes no sense to me. But yeah, it's not uniform across the board.
Did you see from your experience from the time that you dealt with these issues or was able to get salvation, if you will, if we can use that word, have you seen a change and a shift in our culture and our mindset of how we view people with addiction? Is it becoming more accepted that it is a disease and that we do need to treat this as opposed to punish this? Is that idea starting to saturate into the mindset of the people?
I think so. I think it is taking hold. I think we are beginning to understand it is a disease. You know, it's the one disease where your neighbor doesn't come over and drop off a cake and wish you the best. Addiction, you don't get those good wishes cards. But because addiction impacts everyone, I think my experience, everyone is impacted in some way or touched by addiction, that we can't ignore it anymore, and we have to face it. I do think there's disparities even to kind of our national compassion towards those suffering from addiction.
Mm-hmm.
We were, not to get too tangential, but we were looking at outcomes even of diversion courts.
Wow.
And individuals who are most successful. And we see there are racial disparities at play. And one of the biggest reasons, because white individuals are more likely to graduate than individuals of color. And what we found was it wasn't because of procedural justice or even treatment by individuals of color, by law enforcement or probation. It was a lack of culturally competent or culturally congruent treatment providers. There's a shortage of treatment providers of color. There's also a shortage of evidence-based interventions for specifically men of color that are addicted to cocaine. And I shared my story in the beginning with you. When I got into the hospital and really achieved success, I was given Suboxone. Okay. They don't have a Suboxone cocaine.
What was that? You said what? You don't have a what?
So I was given a medication for my disease called Suboxone.
Okay, I heard of that.
But there's no federally approved medication yet to treat cocaine. There are off-label medications, but there's nothing for cocaine. And so it's just a disparity we're moving forward on. But to answer your question, I do see a change nationally, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Kevin Rumley, U.S. Marine Corps Purple Heart recipient, combat veteran, and program director for the Buncombe County Veterans Treatment Court in Asheville, North Carolina. You have a great story. Look forward to the book. It's coming out when you ready to get around to writing it. And also, we got to come back on our show. We got to come back and see you sometime. We appreciate you.
I would love that. It's been a real joy.
My pleasure. This is America's Heroes Group. We'll be right back.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelly, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world?
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
This is where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. So I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family. Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelly, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world.
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
This is where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. So I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group, where we provide education about resources and information for our veterans, military, and their family.
We have in our chase bags, we have a care package of hygiene, we have shaving equipment, we have razors, and for the women we have the same personal hygiene items for them as well. And we want to say thank you for their service. This is Chase Bank. Thank you very much.
People in the neighborhood, free haircuts, the service, the food. Look good. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service.
Okay. On behalf of Cliff Kelly, America's Heroes Group, we sincerely thank Chase Bank for coming where it matters to help homeless veterans have a hot meal today and a care package. We are sincerely.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group Roundtable with our partner, Veterans Legislative Voice. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelly. I'm Sean Clay with the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a partner and a familiar voice, of course. You've heard her many times, U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class, veteran and founder, creator of Veterans Legislative Voice, Miss Stephanie Kalota. How are you doing, Stephanie?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you back. And you're going to give us some updates on public policy, VA suicide increase, from we understand. We have some information on that. And AWP results. And what is AWP? Is that the American War Partnership, or is that something else I'm thinking of?
No, that's exactly it. America's War Partnership. The VA and America's Warrior Partnership have published their own reports, and they're kind of conflicting because they say almost opposite things. So the VA has released a report, which they do every year for September, and it's mostly centered on the statistics on 2019 and 2022. And they report a decrease in suicide rates.
And we talked about that earlier today with Steve Seidman. The suicide rates, according to them, went from like 22 to 17. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so America's Warrior Partnership has found that veterans are actually dying by suicide by a greater rate. But the study was done for the years between 2014 to 2018. So completely different years for the data that they are talking about, and a lot of people get confused on this.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would think that with Afghanistan winding down, or now basically just abruptly ended, that you would have some increases in suicide rates. Unfortunately, I would think that would be the case. However, what I also understand is the real numbers, when you pull back the onion and look at the real numbers, most of the people that were committing suicide are not Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, but actually veterans from previous wars, particularly from the Vietnam era.
Yes, especially it is the older generation. But then we can't ignore the fact that for veterans overall, suicide is 13th on the leading causes of death for veterans. But if you're looking at an age group just between, now I'm trying to find it. If you're looking among veterans under the age of 45, suicide is the second leading cause of death.
And it's crazy looking at the VA website, dug up some numbers. 22% of all U.S. suicide are by veterans. So about a quarter of all suicides, a little more than 20% or a fifth or a quarter roughly of all suicides are by veterans. That's a VA website statistic. But then the census points out of 18 million veterans, we only make up about 7% of the population. So there's definitely a imbalance between suicide rates amongst veterans versus suicide rates amongst the civilian population. Something like a 50-something plus increase. You have a 50% increased chance of committing suicide just by being a veteran.
Yes, and there's also more. There's also more things like the America's Warrior Partnership. Their study is called Operation Deep Dive, and they found some other really interesting statistics. It's the longer that someone served in the military, the lower the probability rate of them taking their own life, and it decreases by 2% every year served. Those that served in the military for less than 3 years at the highest risk of suicide or self-inflicted harm
that makes sense
or
to me,
mentality.
That makes a lot of sense to me when you say that. I mean, does that make sense to you, though?
Oh, it does. It most definitely does, because the people that serve the least and those that are more likely to leave the military in their first contract are the ones that are most vulnerable.
Makes sense.
They have zero power. They're more likely to be abused by bad leadership, by sexual abuse, physical abuse, hazing. They're more likely to get all of that on them, and they feel like that they have zero power to change anything. And those that do stick out longer tends to have a better outlook on their military career.
Because plus you learn a lot of the tools and you kind of get, I won't say used to it, but you kind of get more soldierized, if that's a word, or more marinized or airmanized or sailorized, whatever it might be. Once you're in that system for so long, when you first get in the military, the first couple of years, you're like a fish out of water still. You're still trying to figure out, you still kind of have that, you still got the shell shock from basic training or AIT, and you're still saying yes sir, yes ma'am to everybody and stuff like that. And then once you start getting used to it, now you can have a beer with the fellas, and now you have a little bit of rank, and now you kind of see how the system works.
Yeah, you have a little bit of power to make change. I mean, that was my number one motivation to get higher. I mean, I got E6 by the age of 22, and I know it's really young. So when having that motivation so you can make some changes and actually do some work and actually help people lower than you tend to have a better mentality about life and your service. There's another statistic that they found. It says receiving a demotion during military service increases the service member's odds of dying by suicide by 56%.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really crazy because, which also makes sense because those that are more likely to actually be demoted and to have that conduct and judicial actions against them are more likely reacting from a mental health condition, a triggering traumatic event that happened. And that's also very common for criminals nowadays. A lot of times the way that they act and the way that they do things is because they've had trauma in their lives.
Yeah, now, so that's a weird statistic to me because I wonder, my first question is it because of what happened that got them demoted that makes them want to commit suicide or more likely to commit suicide, or is it the identity that you have this rank or have this prestige or have this position and now you're losing that? To me, I would think it'd be more the former than the latter.
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg concept. It's also that with your mental health condition, it's so bad for you to act out in those ways, and then you go through a demotion rather than treatment and help. That would also be a very traumatic thing to go on top of all of that because you feel like the world's against you.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty scary. But and the thing is that with the America's Warrior Partnership, that is very important to recognize with them is that they found a lot of differences and a lot of mistakes possibly happening because when a veteran dies by suicide, and it's not like within the VA's care, within their purview, they are less likely to actually be identified as a veteran. And so they miss those that die by suicide veterans by 20%, but then they also could be identifying them as veterans with a 5% mistake probability. So there's about 20% there that, that we could have more people, more veterans dying by suicide that we're not aware of. The thing is that their study stops at 2018 and towards the VA statistics and their reporting, 2018 was the peak, and then it started dropping off. So I really can't wait until they come out with more statistics. But the president of the America's Warrior Partnership is actually supposed to be a witness for the hearing that's happening next week for the House of Veterans Affairs Committee.
So what it looks like to me, we need more nonpartisan, independent study, independent research, third parties that are not involved with the VA system or the military system. They're not that are apolitical, that are hired to do more research, maybe university studies or something along these lines, really get to the real numbers. Because most veterans listen to this broadcast. Most veterans around the world are hearing what we're talking about. They're going to say, of course, the VA is going to show the numbers going down, because this has been a big issue for the last 10, 15 years. We just, in the last, 20 years, just recognized the term PTSD. I mean, the Vietnam vets didn't get that benefit of all the things that
combat fatigue.
Exactly. So, all these things that, that are now being coming into the jargon or lexicon today of what we're talking about didn't really exist for the people that really needed it, needed the most, because those are the ones that are committing the suicides. So once again, the veterans are mostly from. My first thought was, when I first heard this, when I came out of the military, I'm like, why is everybody committing? What's going on with these vets committing suicide? And I heard the 22 a day. My first thought was, it's the guys from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's the new generation. But the reality is, it's the guys from Vietnam, the guys from those older wars.
It's also that those that have deployed, they are more likely to have service-connected conditions then they can get care with the VA. So, and the VA has found that there is actually those veterans that actually get help through the VA and get a mental health condition diagnosed and treated for, they're less likely to die by suicide. I'm trying to find the actual research where I'm reading it. And then 42% of the recent veterans that used the healthcare system died by suicide in 2028. They did not have a documented mental health condition.
Once again, going back to screening, I mean, I think we talked about this before. I think screening is critical when people coming into the military, because mental health is something that we, I think, as a society, are just now waking up to.
Yes.
We're just now getting to the point where we're understanding that just like you take care of your knees, you got to take care of your feet, you got to take care of your teeth, you got to take care of your eyes, you got to brush your hair, you do all these things to take care of your body, you got to exercise, eat right. Your brain is an organ that needs attention as well. We just take it for granted.
Yes, and it's so important. And I know Glenda's going to she's going to want me to say this, and it's still true that veteran women are twice as likely to die by suicide than the civilian population. Thankfully, it has decreased per the VA reporting for 2019 and 2020, especially 2020, because the suicide rate fell by 14%, which is really amazing. And I'd like to contribute that to probably the increase and the rise of the conversation of military sexual trauma, because it helped women veterans talk about that issue, have healthcare professionals become more familiar with that issue, and then also the talk about women veterans are less likely to get a service connection to a mental health condition or others because it was MST, because they didn't report it. And when I say MST, I mean military sexual trauma. It's one of the most unreported crimes that happens in the military.
Now, because you're a woman veteran, and you are also an NCO, I want to ask you this question, because I think you're the most qualified and to give us a really good analysis as to what the argument is pro and against, because this kind of trickles into other areas as well. We talk about mental health, and we talk about the myth that women are mentally or emotionally not tough enough to deal with military life. How do you address that? How do you respond to that notion? And then also, how do you compare that with the higher rates of suicide in women who are veterans?
Oh man, yeah. And I used to be a sexual assault response coordinator as well for an Army Reserve Brigade. So the thing is that I say it's BS. I can't use any better words for it, but BS, that women can't handle mental health things as great as others, as men, and handle multiple things at multiple times, mostly because women control themselves when they're being catcalled, when men are trying to get something out of them, when they're treated like crap by men with mansplaining, and many other things. And actually, She-Hulk had said it best that, you know what, we control this rage in ourselves all the time, 24/7. We're pretty sure we can, manage it ourselves. One of the things that it was really interesting in my military career was that I became a battle captain. If some people don't know what that is that you're sitting in a big operations office, staring at a theater of operations on a screen, and you're managing the logistics and everything that's going on. I've seen infantry, combat arms, NCOs, and officers crumble in those type of environments sitting in that operations room, but I had kicked their butts with it when I did it. And I'm not combat whatsoever. I did transportation and ammunition and ordnance. But having that mentality of multiple things happening at once, you can actually register, you can have that quick time frame so you can fix everything. There's a lot of things that women are really great at because we're multitaskers and we can handle things, multiple things in the air. So yes, women can do it. It's the thing is that it's the mentality that women can't. And if women think that way, that's also very degrading to themselves, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, just from my own experience personally, another, actually a father of a vet told me this. I think his son passed away. He was a sailor in the Navy. He mentioned that when under stress and duress, when everybody else is trying to figure out how to get the bad guys off the plane, if it came down to it and it was the only option available, the woman's the one who is going to make the decision to take down the whole plane if necessary.
Yep. Yeah. Because they have a self-sacrificing gene in them. It comes with being a mother. That's very common in known studies. And the other thing about with women is that they are the smallest. They're the smallest demographic amongst veterans. They do have the least amount. They have the most amount of services not available to them because of their gender. And so a lot of times women veterans are not comfortable with speaking about MST, especially for mental health services, is because they're more likely to be surrounded by men, treated by professionals that don't understand. And for many VA hospitals, their first line of defense for treating mental health cases are actually with group therapy. And for a lot of MST survivors, that is a very scary battlefield that they would never want to go into. And so there is a big wall for veterans, women veterans, to talk about those things. And so it's pretty scary for them.
So what's the conversation around now with multiple tours? Because now we have an all-volunteer military for the most part, although, I mean, it's not out of the question in our Constitution and our Congress that we might have a draft if the conflict were to arise, such a conflict were to arise. But as of right now, pretty much is a volunteer military. What's being addressed with multiple tours of duty? Because that has a big impact on PTSD. The more trauma you're exposed to, of course, you're going to have some issues coming back. You're going to have memories. You're going to have flashbacks, bad dreams, nightmares, and things like that. What are we doing about that?
It's still the combination of group therapy. There's options between outpatient, residential. There's also intensive outpatient that has popped up during COVID, which is that the veterans get to stay at their homes and they do everything virtually.
But what I mean is like as far as is anybody bringing to the issue to the military or the VA about maybe trying to curb how many tours of duty people are doing now? Because before people would do 1 or 2 tours. Now guys are doing 5, 6, 7 tours.
Yeah.
Back to back, staying overseas.
Yeah, they haven't brought that up, and that's mostly because of the separation between the VA and DoD. There's been a lot of crosstalk between the two agencies recently, especially for suicide, but I have not heard that conversation come up yet.
Now that's the conversation we need to be talking about. And then you mentioned also too about COVID. There's a lot of research on the civilian side that talks about some of the unintended consequences, the collateral damage of being locked up or being staying in place, sheltering in place. Where people weren't going out, they're locked in their houses for extended periods of time because they couldn't go to work because their work was shut down or whatever. What type of psychology? What's the psychological impact of that as it plays into maybe with the veteran population. Perhaps you would think, and because I've had this conversation with other people that are tracking these numbers, the guys that do this for a living, tracking these numbers, and they're saying that they're getting information from the CDC and from other places that the death tolls and death rates have not really slowed down that much since 2020.
Yeah, and honestly, the thing is that this VA report actually did a study from the beginning of, late March, and they didn't find any increases on the VA site-documented suicides, on-campus suicides, and then their emergency department visits for suicide attempts. To me, it does, because everybody's terrified of going into the hospital and catching COVID or anything else when you go in, because a lot of times when you had something that it's not, if your leg's not falling off, you're not going to go to the ER because there's COVID. Mm-hmm. So to me, that doesn't make so much sense. The VA really didn't do any more study past that, which is very frustrating. Mm. But the Veterans Crisis Line has increased. It did increase in their numbers of taking calls. I know that the numbers went through the roof when they were going through the Afghanistan withdrawal, but it was already high before that. Thankfully, though, they are being supported now under, I think it was 998 or 988, that now number, 3-digit number that they can now call to then be sent through to the Veterans Crisis Line. So they're centrally supported by other national suicide crisis lines. So it's a little bit of a better, well-rounded effort that they can actually get some funding more easily made available to them.
Well, any last words before we go? We got about a minute left.
You were correct about the women service members leaving the military for the pregnancies. That was 1976. That was the 2nd District Court case that took that rule out. And anybody that are going to be in the D.C. area, there will be reproductive events happening in the D.C. area next week. Look up #uniform access. Thank you.
Stephanie Kalota, always a pleasure to have you. Always got great information. One of my favorite guest partners on with our America's Heroes group. Appreciate you.
Love you so much. Bye.
Thank you. This is America's Heroes group. We'll be right back.
Welcome to America's Heroes Group. Hear your voice where we connect the disconnected intentionally.
Who is Cliff Kelly, the governor of talk radio, the icon of radio throughout the world?
Chauncey Spencer II and I, again, share a special relationship. His late great father, Tuskegee Airman Chauncey E. Spencer, took me as a child on my first airplane ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is something that people need to see. Often we don't, do the things to show how great our people are. It changes the paradigm of how people think about us, about the collective consciousness of what it means to be us.
And we've been having great conversations about trying to get more African Americans into aviation. And we got a bill that we're trying to get passed that would allow the Pell Grant to be used to help finance aviation education.
This is where I started with this entire conversation by saying, if it were not for America's Heroes Group, I would have given up. So I want to get all my accolades out the way on behalf of America's Heroes Group. Ms. Glenda, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me to press on. I would encourage you all to support this organization. One thing for sure, America's Hero Group is out there. Ms. Glenda will take the time. Ms. Glenda Smith will take the time to listen to you and to steer you in the direction that you need to go.
Thank you for watching another episode of America's Heroes Group.
Heroes Group with our partner VETS, Veterans Employment and Training Service. September is National Suicide Prevention and Hispanic Heritage Month. Today is Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Our host is Cliff Kelly. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have a panelist with us, Ms. Margarita Devlin. She is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Operations and Management at the U.S. Department of Labor, VETS. We're going to talk about transitioning assistance and the Transitioning Assistance Program, TAP, otherwise known as, and the initiative that program has brought and the importance of it, of bringing veterans home and then helping them go back into civilian life. How are you doing, Margarita?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
My pleasure. Doing pretty good. So tell us first what TAPS is and how it all came about.
Sure, happy to. So the Transition Assistance Program, as we know it today, really kind of started with a law that changed everything in 2011. Before that, TAP was sort of up to the command, up to individuals to sort of, decide who was going to brief what topics to help the service member know what was available to them. So in 2011, a law was put into place that dictated that transition assistance was required of every separating service member, and that it would be a consistent programming no matter which installation you were leaving from. So that was in 2011. So I like to say that, I like to start there because a lot of our veterans who might be in the audience right now will have transitioned out of the military before then. So I want folks to know it's a little bit different. Now, 2011 was a while ago. We've made changes just about every year, and those changes are made typically based on a combination of laws passed by Congress and also veteran feedback and transitioning service member feedback. So the Transition Assistance Program, as we know it today, is a full week of curriculum. And that week is provided for by DOL, Department of Labor, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, and also the Small Business Administration, because some veterans or some service members are interested in entrepreneurship. Department of Education and Office of Personnel Management are also involved in this. So it's a very multi-federal government agency effort. And really the goal of TAP is just to teach the service member what they need to do to transition effectively into civilian life and to access all the benefits that are available to them. And I'm happy to go into more details and explain it a little bit more, but let me know if you have specific questions.
Actually, you're actually right on track of what I wanted to know, because one point that I was going to bring up, which you mentioned, was before, because when I got out of the military, I don't remember any kind of a transition. I mean, when I left, when I got out of the military, I was in the National Guard, so maybe it's different for Guard members. It was basically, okay, your ETS is whatever it was, June the 8th. And that was after June 8th came, I just stopped going back to drill. That was the end of it. Nobody talked to me about what are your plans? What are you going to ready to do? Like what, do you want to re-enlist? Do you want, it was nothing. It was just like, okay, I guess my time's up. I can go home now. And so before 1991, what would have been the process? What would veterans back then experience if they left the military versus after 91 when these types of programs, transition programs, started to come about and started to get developed?
So before that, it would depend on the military installation you were at, what type of partnerships they had, what type of staffing. You might have gotten a really lengthy briefing with a lot of information, or you might have just gotten a see you later, good luck. It just really was so varied across the different installations, which is part of why Congress put this law into place that mandated that service members be offered the opportunity to participate in sort of the full curriculum. Mm-hmm. Now we realize it's still a classroom experience, right? So it's not the be all end all. You sit through a week's worth of classes to learn what you should learn, but there's a lot of transition, a lot of being successful in transition relies on some pre-planning, right? The time to plan. So currently, service members can start as early as a year before they separate, or if they're going to be retiring, they can start as early as 2 years before they separate, before they retire. So we give them, the law gives DOD some broad parameters around how early they can start, because we recognize early intervention is really important.
And I want to go back to that, because that's something that's really critical. And I heard this before, that the earlier you start, because most people, it's like when you, there was one NCO or officer that mentioned this, and that he was a TAP specialist, and he mentioned that the people that have the most success are the ones that start earlier. They don't start transitioning or this transition process the week or the day before they're getting ready to get the ETS or get out of the military. They're thinking you want to start thinking about this maybe a year or two before that transition comes, and maybe even having conversations, and even maybe the job of some of our leadership, NCOs and things like that, talking to your troops and your soldiers and your sailors and Marines and service members. What are your plans after the military? What do you want to do after this? Your MOS. Is your MOS something that will transition easily into the civilian world? Or will you have to get retrained into something else? If you're doing artillery, there's not a lot of artillery jobs out there in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that, and how is the program today addressed that issue?
So a lot of different ways. First of all, DoD has opened up what they call the military life cycle, which allows organizations like ours and like the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide programming that can start as early as a session, right? As soon as you raise your right hand, you take your pledge, and you're in the military service. There should be components of your career where you're thinking about what you're going to do after the military, because everybody eventually becomes a civilian, right? They perform their service and then they leave, they become a civilian. So thinking about their career, there's a career planning that happens in the very beginning of the service member's career. And that career planning has sort of some continuity throughout their career. And then at least a year before separation, they should be starting to talk about what they're going to do when they get out. Now, in terms of MOSs and military skills translators, there are some tools that help a service member, and those are provided during TAP, that help a service member understand, if I were just going to use my experience in the military and go straight into employment, what would that look like? What are the jobs I would be qualified to do today? And Department of Labor's program teaches them how to access that information, how to make that translation, and then also teaches them how to create their resume and highlight their skills, because we know from experience that a lot of times service members don't really know how to put into civilian terms what their military experience is. So we teach them how to do that in the classroom. And then we're testing out a pilot right now based on feedback from veterans that the TAP class is kind of like drinking from a fire hose. It's so much information. There's so much to think about. And quite honestly, sometimes because of deployments or other things, they may not be able to start a year ahead of time. So we offer a pilot program called we always use acronyms, right? ENPP, Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot. And it's in 22 installations nationwide. And what this does is it provides one-on-one assistance. So we have these trained individuals who are career counselors who will sit with a service member after they go through the class and work with them one-on-one to help them identify their career path. That's sometimes the hardest piece. What do I want to do in the civilian world? Do I want to do what I did in the military? Or maybe I want to do something completely different. And what would that look like in a pathway? Do I need to go to college? Or could I learn how to do this job on the job through on-the-job training? Are there apprenticeship options where I can go straight into a salary, start earning a living while still learning a new trade, and make a good living that way? Or do I want to go to college? There's so many different paths that a service member could take. And so we want to make sure they know how to apply their leadership skills into their resume so that it's well articulated, and also what career path they want to choose and how to get there, how to become competitive for that employment path.
Now, there's a YouTube video out that you did a few years back, and really great information on that. And you talked about the 2019 Post-Separation Transition Assistance Program Assessment Outcome Study. They wanted to make it longer, but they ran out of words. So it's called the PS or EPS TAP, as the acronym goes, as we love acronyms in the military. Tell us, what were some of the things you learned in that study?
Wow, you did some research. That was back when I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So we did that study, and the reason we did that study and the way we did it is because when we're very interested in how our service members feel about our classes that we offer, right? It's important that we know, do they like the class? Are they feeling confident in their transition when they go through the class? Are the facilitators doing a good job? Is the content relevant? So we ask them a short survey while they're in the classroom. As soon as they're done with class, we ask them to tell us about their course experience. And our scores are just great. I mean, 95, 96 percentiles. They really just seem to really like the course and believe that it helps their confidence. But what we really wanted to know is, okay, that's great, but what happens after you separate? Did you still feel that way after you separated, or when reality hit and you're now a veteran and you're in your community, what does it feel like now? So we wanted to ask them to look back on their experience in TAP and now reflect as a veteran. Now that you know what you know, because you didn't know what you didn't know when you were still active duty, now what do you think about the course? And so we asked them at 3 intervals, and if I remember right, it was 6 months, a year, and 3 years, or 18 months and 3 years. Don't quote me on that because it's been a while since I've been at the VA. But what the survey really showed us was that there were a lot of components of the TAP curriculum that they really could still appreciate. They could look back in time and say, that was really good stuff. It helped me in my transition. We also were able to gather some data on their current employment situation, whether they were seeking health care, and just sort of a well-rounded study of their situation. And, you know, trying to go from memory, I don't want to quote anything from the study and get it wrong, but there were a lot of positive comments and a lot of positive data points about TAP. I think that probably the most important thing is that they really don't understand what's going to happen in transition until they get there, so we used to think of transition as ending at the DDT 14, right?
Right.
Well, we don't do that anymore. We actually codified that transition should be considered to be at least 1 year before, also at least 1 year after separation from the military, because there's a lot you don't know about what's going to be present in your transition experience after you leave the military. It's kind of like you said, you know, you're just, you know, see you later and you're gone. Well, even with all this training that we provide, there are circumstances you can't anticipate. And we wanted to normalize for veterans that first year is not necessarily going to be super easy. You're not going to remember everything that you learned in TAP. And we wanted to normalize that for them so that they didn't feel like something was wrong if they didn't remember or if they needed help. So one of the things Department of Labor is doing now, and this is also in a pilot phase, but we're getting great reviews from the veterans who have participated, is a off-base transition training pilot. And it's off-base, it's in community classrooms in these few states that we're pilot testing. And it enables any veteran who separated from the military to go in and get whatever pieces of the TAP class that they still feel like they need. And it doesn't matter whether you just got out 6 months ago, whether you're in your first year, or whether you've been out for 20 years. If you have a change in your employment situation, either you've lost a job or you really just want to change jobs and you want to do a new career, or you've just gotten out and, you know, 6 months has gone by and you're feeling a little lost, whatever your circumstances are, you can come in and you can learn the pieces you need to learn. So, for example, maybe you've got a really great resume and you did that all during TAP and you're feeling pretty confident about your resume. But you start going to interviews and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I didn't maybe pay attention to the interview class. I really need to brush up on that. Well, you can just take that module and learn, and you can come in and learn how to interview. Or maybe you realize the importance of LinkedIn and you didn't quite realize you were going to need it. And now you don't really know the right way to use it. You can come in and just do that module, or you can do all of the modules and basically replicate what you went through in the TAP class. And the really cool thing about it is that even though we're pilot testing it in a few states, we also have it online virtually. So it doesn't matter where you live. If you want to come in and refresh on any of these topics, you can do so. And I also just want to say the military spouse is a part of the family unit. So for service members who are married, you know, we have a transition course just for military spouses.
Okay.
It's the Transition Employment Assistance for Military Spouses Programs, which is acronymed TEAMS, which is kind of easy to remember. So the military spouse, of course, can also go through TEAMS to learn everything they need to know about how to get a good job. And then after the veteran and their spouse have gotten into their community and they've settled in, that military spouse can also access the off-base transition training. So they can go together, they can go separately, or maybe one partner needs it and not the other partner. So we're really trying to kind of wrap our arms around that whole experience of transition from before all the way through at least that first year and beyond. Because, you know, honestly, you go through employment transitions so many times in your life, right? And you never know when you're going to be making a career change where you might need to sit down with a career counselor and go, okay, I don't know how to change my resume from this type of job that I've been doing to this new type of job that I'd like to transition into, or how do I access an apprenticeship for this type of career that I'd like to start? So we really just want to be there for that veteran, really their entire life.
Okay, so now you're actually a few questions, but I'm going to reiterate what you mentioned because these are things that I wanted to ask you about, which is, you talked about how you can access TAP. So you can do it through the classroom, through different areas or different facilities. And these facilities are on post or on a base, or are they anything off post?
The TAP classes are on the base.
Okay, but you can also do it through online.
You can. We prefer that service members attend in person. It's really a much better experience, to be in person. But throughout COVID, with the pandemic, we did convert to virtual, and we did all the TAP classes in a virtual environment. So we can still do that. We learned a lot about how to make the virtual environment, still interactive and make it a good learning experience. So we still offer that if the service member needs it or prefers it.
And then also, which is really important, because when you transition, it's really not just the veteran, it's also the veteran plus their family that transitions.
Yeah.
So you have services and also information for the family as well, particularly for spouses of military members, and they can access it through the same means, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So who has the easier transition? Is it the veteran who's been in for 5 years and gets out, or the lifer who's been in for 20 years but is now retiring from a career at 45 or 40? Because they came in when they were 20, they did their 20 years or 22 years or 23 years, and now they're 45, and it's the rest of their life they gotta look forward to now. So who has the more difficult transition from your experience?
Transition is really just a very individual experience, right? So categorically speaking, I think that individuals who have stayed in the military longer, have made it a career, probably have higher level leadership experiences, right? And in some cases, they may have even gotten some college under their belt while they were in, or they may have come in already as officers with some college. So there's some advantages to that. But I'll tell you, it's really just a very unique and individualized experience. So a younger service member coming out right now has the Forever GI Bill. They can go to college, they can get, the stipend, and they can really just devote some time to preparing for a career. But also, they might want to get into a career right away. They might have, a family, a spouse and children, and so they may need to start earning a living right away, in which case they can go into an apprenticeship option. But that might be a little bit more challenging, right? They might not really know what they want to do. There's also sort of expectation management with salary expectations. When you're in the military, you know this because you were in the military, there's a lot wrapped into your, what you bring home in terms of your pay. There's housing, there's all sorts of other benefits. When you become a civilian employee, some of those things change for you. And so salary expectations can sometimes be a little bit of a shock for veterans that were in for a longer time. But I can't really say to you that it's easier or harder for one or the other. It's very individualized.
That's interesting because a lot of guys I've known that have left the military who are lifers, it seems that from my personal experience, it seems like they had a little bit of a trickier time because it seemed like when you're in the military and like in this time warp, everything's moving at a different speed, and then come back. It's like you stepped into Back to the Future, and all of a sudden you're Marty McFly in 1985, and it's like what you're used to 1955. What happened in 1955? And my brother going through that as a Navy vet. I mean, he was in the military for a long, long time. He was still trying to get used to cell phones, and that's something that's like, and so you would think that you might have a different approach for a person who's older versus a person who's younger, but you're saying it's individualized. So it's not just about a general program where everybody gets the same speech like we're used to in the military, for the most part. It's an individualized approach. So let me ask you this. So how is TAP evolving to today? What are the changes that are happening to now from all the information you've taken in and all the experiences you have? What do you see TAP going to?
Well, so the one thing is what I mentioned earlier about, you have this classroom experience, right? And yes, it's interactive, and some of the military installations will do kind of a separate course for the officers, kind of a leadership-focused one versus the younger enlisted. Some installations will do that, and for that reason, right, to kind of make it a little bit to the audience. But it's that individualized assistance. So it's one thing to get classroom learning, and we think we do a pretty good job of that based on the feedback we get from service members. But that's why we're doing the Employment Navigator initiative, so that when you finish with the classroom, everybody in that classroom is going to be at a different level. They range anywhere from, yep, I've already worked on a draft resume. Now I've learned something. I can go make it better. I already kind of know what I want to do when I get out, all the way from that to I have not the slightest idea. I haven't started a resume. This is all great information, but I'm overwhelmed, right? So there's a whole range of what that individual will be feeling in the classroom. So being able to walk out of the classroom and sit down with a career counselor to say, okay, I need some help because I'm not really sure where to go from here or how to start. Or even if you do know what you want to do and you feel pretty confident, you might still want to meet with that person to go, okay, I kind of know what I want to do. I think I've got a pretty good resume, but I'd love for somebody to take a look at it and also help kind of guide my path to finding a job. What organizations can I work with? And we have some vetted partners that we can refer veterans or service members who are transitioning to get that kind of assistance. So we are evolving to trying to make the best of, the fact that when there's 200,000 service members leaving the military each year, you have to do some things in groups, right? But being able to offer that one-on-one assistance to those individuals who need it, I think is really proving to be helpful. Those individuals have given us great feedback about the ability to work one-on-one with somebody.
That's the thing I didn't quite understand. So I think you brought some clarity to it, which is when you leave, so if you're going through TAP, you actually can get one-on-one counseling or one-on-one help. So it's not like you just take a class or go to see a class and you walk out and that's the end of it. You actually are sitting down with someone who can kind of guide you through the process, or however long that process takes. Is that right?
In the states where we're doing this Navigator pilot, yes, you have right there on the installation, you've got the person you can work with one-on-one when you walk out of the classroom. Where we don't have that, there's still help available to you. There's the American job centers, which are all over the country. DOL provides funding to those job centers to serve veterans. So, and if you go to our website, the easiest thing for people to remember, I think, is just remember www.dol for Department of Labor.gov. And if you go there and you look for under agencies for Veterans Employment and Training Service, you'll find all the resources I'm talking about. How do I enroll in the off-base transition? How do I find this career service that you're telling me about? I've been a veteran for 10 years, 1 year, 20 years. I want this one-on-one help. You can go there, look for the Career One Stop, and you can find the one in your area. And you can either go in person and work one-on-one. Some people prefer the in-person kind of relationship experience, or you can access the services virtually and talk to somebody on the phone or by Zoom. So that's why I was trying to say, we're here for the whole life of the veteran, from when they are in the military, also for Guard and Reservists. You mentioned that. That's a great thing for OBTT because a lot of times, you don't transition the same way as an active duty member transitions. You're not with a group of people necessarily in a military installation. Sometimes you come right back to a community. So we want to make sure we have access to off-base transition training for our military service members who are serving in the Guard and in the Reserves, and make sure that we can reach them better.
I think that's really important. That you give us a lot of great information, and I want to iterate it again. Now, is this just on the DOL website, or is it also on the VA website?
The VA website, DOL, and DOD all have the Transition Assistance Program listed with resources. But if you want to really access the employment-focused resources, especially after you get out of the military, I would go to DOL.gov.
DOL.gov, ladies and gentlemen, service members out there, veterans, DOL.gov, that's where you want to go to get the employment portion of TAP. Because TAP has a lot of other things going on with mental health and other things, but particularly for employment, the DOL website is where you want to go to and get those resources. Also, you can look at America's Heroes Group's website and get information from us as well, so we can direct you to the right places. We really appreciate your time. You've given us a lot of information, and we got to have you back on the show to have more this information going out there, because we just touched and kind of scratched the surface of what you guys are doing. And there's a lot more stuff that we can go into, and the program is evolving, and there's a lot of stuff we want to keep up with and know how it evolves and how things turn out as we transition and make this new journey into the next phase of the military and also the veteran world in the future. But thanks for your time, Ms. Devlin.
Thank you for having me, and I'd like to come back anytime you'd like to have me back.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
What a fantastic information resource show, Department of Labor vets. Bravo. I mean, literally
Yes. We are so fortunate to have great partners, great panelists, because that's what we started, Sean, all of us, Cliff, myself, you, Dr. Arnold. We're about the information. We're about the resources to connect that veteran, that military family members, and others to information. If they thought they had it, for sure now you know you have it. So yeah, bravo, bravo. Great shows today from Legally Speaking with Steve.
Always.
Yes, from National Association of Drug Court Professionals. Kevin, home run, hello.
Kevin.
Yes.
Great guy.
Yes, Stephanie
Semper
always
Fi.
brings the heat. Veteran legislative voice. Yeah.
Go Hammer or Ara.
Yeah. So please feel free to call America's Heroes Group at 312-803-2618. We're located at 155 North Wacker Drive, Suite 4250, Chicago, Illinois 60606. To our technical producer, Lady J, thank you for always keeping us balanced every week. To the best digital media producer in the world, Ivan Ortega, Scouts Arna Production, and the co-host with the mostest. Yes, Sean. Yes.
That's right.
You are well researched and ready. You keep us at that level that we have established from the beginning. Excellence.
That's
with
right.
integrity. So thank you all to our global listening audience for watching us live stream on Facebook and YouTube. You can go to the podcast and do research on other shows. If you think you may be missing some information, our podcast is uploaded every Tuesday. So America's Heroes Group, that's what we do. We connect the disconnected intentionally. Have a blessed weekend. Please get vaccinated.